She did not move. She did not breathe. She kept her fingers absolutely still against that clear, slightly tacky strip along the inner rail of the table, and she thought about Anderson. About a hospital room in Lagos that smelled of antiseptic and something underneath the antiseptic that she would spend the rest of her life trying to forget. About a doctor's voice going flat with medical distance, sustained skin contact, slow absorption. By the time symptoms present, the exposure window is long past. She straightened up, placed the dish down, smiled at the guest beside her like her heart wasn't doing something violent inside her chest. Then she completed one full circuit of the table, poured water at the far end, turned, and on her way back she stopped behind his chair, the man in the dark coat, the one who had arrived last and changed the pressure in the room without raising his voice or making a single unnecessary movement. And she leaned in by a fraction. 3 words, below a whisper, in Korean. Under your table. She kept walking. She did not look back. And in the chair behind her, Kang Min-jae went completely still. If you think you know what kind of story this is, stay with it. Because what happened after those 3 words is not what anyone expected. Not Vera, not Min-jae. Not the man sitting across the table who had arranged the entire evening so that nobody walked out of it having changed anything. Subscribe before we go any further. This story earns it. Let's go back to where it started. Vera had been in Seoul for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She knew the count because she had started it from the morning she landed at Incheon, with 2 suitcases and a grief so fresh it still bled when she moved too quickly. Her brother Anderson had been 26 when he died. Lagos, a Papa port, a warehouse accident that was never properly called what it was. An industrial compound called Hexabond 9, stored improperly in a cracked container, leaked during an unloading shift. Anderson was exposed for 6 hours before anyone on that floor understood what was in the air around them. The compound worked slowly, silently, absorbing through skin contact and beginning its damage on the organs long before any symptom announced itself. By the time he reached hospital, the process was already well underway. Vera sat with him for 19 days. The doctors kept showing her the compound's particular texture, its almost imperceptible smell, what it looked like on glass surfaces when concentrated. They needed her to know in case of secondary exposure, in case he recovered and came into contact with it again. He did not recover. She came to Seoul because Anderson had been building toward it. Korean flashcards on his bedroom wall, conversations about the Lagos-Seoul trade corridor that he talked about like a door he was already standing in front of, just waiting for the right moment to push through. He never pushed through, so Vera pushed through for both of them and tried, every single day, to make that feel like something other than what it was. She worked at Huksogium, Black Salt, a private dining establishment in Itaewon that served Korean West African fusion cuisine to the kind of clientele that arrived without reservations and tipped in cash, and whose names you did not ask. She spoke Korean with the particular fluency of someone who had learned it from a person who never got to use it. She kept her head down, her eyes open. She moved through Seoul like a woman who understood that visibility had a price. The night everything changed was a Thursday. Private booking, full restaurant, security at both entrances. Her colleague Ji-soo pulled her aside during the staff briefing, voice low and tight. The man hosting tonight is Song Dae-hyun. Vera didn't know the name. Ji-soo's face told her that was a form of luck she was about to exhaust. Just don't be interesting tonight, Ji-soo whispered. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, not interesting. Promise me. When am I ever interesting? Vera said. Ji-soo looked at her with the expression of someone who already knows how a story ends. She said nothing else. The guests arrived in that procession of wealth and danger that Vera had learned to recognize. The studied casualness, the invisible security, the way the room's energy redistributed itself around each new arrival like water finding its level. Song Dae-hyun was older than she expected. silver-haired, still in the way that comes from decades of not needing to move because other people move for you. He walked through Hook Sogeum like he had already purchased it, which Vera would later discover he effectively had. She was assigned to the far end of the main table. The last guest arrived 40 minutes after everyone else. He came alone. Dark coat. Nothing immediately remarkable except for this. Every other man in that room was performing something. Authority, wealth, danger, ease. Performing it consciously for each other's benefit. This man performed nothing. He simply walked in and sat down, and the room reorganized itself around him the way rooms do around certain people. Naturally, without his asking. Without his noticing. Vera noticed this because she noticed everything. She filed it and moved on. She didn't know his name yet. The first course passed without incident. Vera worked, invisible in the way good waitstaff are always invisible, which she had always preferred. It was during the second course that she crouched to retrieve a dropped napkin beneath the table. Routine. Her hand reached. Her fingertips grazed the underside of the table's apron rail as she straightened. She felt it. Clear, slightly viscous, deliberate. The world narrowed to a single corridor of recognition. Hexabond 9. She knew it the way you know a smell from childhood, not through logic, but through the body, through something that lives below thought. 19 days in a Lagos hospital. A doctor's voice going carefully flat. Anderson's breathing changing at night in ways she had learned to hear from across a room. She stood, replaced the napkin, completed her circuit, poured water at the far end with completely steady hands, smiled at something a guest said that she did not hear. She walked back to the service corridor and stopped against the wall. Think. She could be wrong. She was working from texture, a ghost of a smell, a memory saturated with grief. She had not touched it directly. She could not confirm anything. But her body was not asking whether she was sure. Her body was already certain. And Vera had learned, in the years since Anderson, to trust the parts of herself that moved faster than her mind. She looked through the service window, at Song Dae-hyun watching the table with the private satisfaction of a man observing a plan, executing itself without complication. At the man in the dark coat, his hand drifting toward the table edge during an animated moment in the conversation beside him. Fingers relaxed. About to come to rest, she was back through the door before she finished deciding. She worked her way around the table with the unhurried efficiency that had made her the most trusted server in that establishment. When she reached his chair, she reached across to adjust the placement of a dish. Plausible, invisible. She leaned in by a fraction. Her voice was below a whisper. In Korean, completely steady. Under your table, the inner rail. Don't touch it. Don't look down. Don't react. She moved to the next guest. She did not look back. Like this video right now, because what Song Dae-hyun does next is the reason this story almost ends before it begins. Song Dae-hyun noticed the pause in her circuit. He noticed the lean. He couldn't hear the words, but he was a man who had built his entire operation on reading the geometry of moments, and something in the angle of that brief exchange told him that information had transferred. He looked at Kang Min-jae, restructuring himself at the table with the practiced invisibility of someone who had received a warning and was executing his response without a single visible tell. Hands folded in his lap, leaning slightly back, still laughing at the right moments. Song Dae-hyun looked at Vera. She was at the far end of the table, pouring water, face entirely neutral. He filed her name. He filed her face. He kept his expression pleasant and said nothing for the rest of the evening. Min-jae ended the dinner early, a fabricated call from his office. Plausible, unverifiable. Song Dae-hyun could not object without revealing that he needed more time. As guests gathered, two of Min-jae's people, seated as guests throughout the evening, quietly positioned themselves beside Song Dae-hyun. He was guided from the room through a side entrance, no raised voices, no scene, just the quiet, efficient conclusion of something already decided. Min Jae was last to leave. At the entrance, he stopped, turned. His eyes moved once deliberately across the dining room and found Vera at a far table, clearing glasses her back to him. He held that for 3 seconds. Then he left. Vera felt the look without turning around. She finished her shift. She walked home through the Seoul night telling herself it was over. She was wrong about that. That same night, across the city, Min Jae sat alone in his office. Standard procedure after a compromised operation. Background checks on every staff member present. Files arrived one by one. He read through them efficiently until he reached hers. Nigerian national, Lagos-born. Relocated to Seoul following the death of a younger sibling. No criminal record. No known associations. He stopped. Relocated following the death of a younger sibling. He read it again. He thought about her voice behind his chair. The absolute steadiness of it. How she kept walking without looking back, without checking whether he had heard, without any of the hesitation that would have been entirely reasonable given what she had just done. He thought about what kind of loss teaches a person to be that steady, what it costs to build that kind of composure, and what it covers underneath. He could read further. His people had access to everything: hospital records, incident reports, the full picture of whatever had brought her from Lagos to Seoul, with 2 years of careful, quiet living. He closed the file. He did not read further. This was unusual for him. He made his living knowing everything about everyone. He closed her file anyway and sat with the particular unfamiliar feeling of having chosen not to know something, of wanting, for reasons he could not yet name, to let her tell him herself if she ever chose to. He sat with that feeling for a long time. 4 days of normal, Seoul enormous and indifferent around Vera, in the way she had come to find comforting. She was on her usual river path home after a closing shift when a man sat down beside her on a bench she had chosen 30 seconds earlier. She had not seen him approach. He opened a folder on his lap, tilted it toward her. Just enough. Just long enough. Inside, a photograph of her mother's house in Lagos, the front garden, the potted plants her mother rearranged every few months. Recent. The man closed the folder, left without a single word. Vera sat on that bench watching the time on her phone for 11 minutes, knowing she had put her mum in danger. Then she walked home and lay on her covers fully dressed and stared at the ceiling and thought about her mother in that house right now, completely unaware that someone had stood outside her gate with a camera. She thought, what did I do? She went to work the next morning. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Her work visa renewal, submitted 6 weeks prior, had been placed under additional review. No timeline given. She could not leave Korea while the file was open. She could not legally work if it was denied. She read the letter twice, folded it, put it in her bag, trying her best not to break down. That afternoon, she went to the immigration office in person. She sat across from a clerk who told her politely that her file was under review and there was no projected timeline, and there was nothing she could do to accelerate the process. She asked who had initiated the review. The clerk could not tell her. She asked what she could do. The clerk could not tell her that either. She walked out of that office into the Seoul afternoon and stood on the pavement and understood for the first time the full architecture of what was being done to her. Not violence, not threats. Walls, being built one at a time methodically around her life. She called her mother that evening, said nothing about any of it. Just listened to her mother's voice for 4 minutes. The garden, a neighbour's new baby, what she was cooking. Small, ordinary, beautiful things. That sounds good, Mama. I love you. She ended the call. Sat in her apartment. Thought about Anderson, who had planned to come to Seoul and never made it. Thought about everything she had built here in his memory. She thought, I am not leaving this city because someone wants me to. I am not doing that. That decision, made alone, quietly with nobody watching, was the moment Vera became exactly who this story needed her to be. An envelope appeared under a guest's plate in her section later that week. A plain card, a phone number. Nothing else. She stood in the back kitchen holding it. Jisoo materialized immediately, saw her face. Who? I don't know yet. Yet, Jisoo repeated, like the word itself was suspicious. Vera put the card in her apron pocket. She thought about the man in the dark coat, about the 3 seconds he stood at the entrance looking at her before he left. She did not call the number, but she did not throw the card away. He came back 1 week after the dinner. No reservation. Afternoon service. He sat at a regular table. When Jisoo moved toward his section, Vera intercepted her without explanation and took it herself. She was aware this was not nothing. She did it anyway. She brought the menu. He didn't look at it. He looked at her. Are you all right? I'm fine. Something to drink. Someone spoke to you, he said. Not a question. She said nothing. I'm going to ask you one question, he said. You don't have to answer. She waited. How did you know what it was? The kitchen sounds continued around them. A couple laughed near the window. Seoul moved past in its endless indifferent stream. Vera made a decision about how much of herself to give a man she did not yet know. She decided on Anderson, because Anderson deserved to be spoken out loud in rooms that had never held his name. My brother, she said. He died 3 years ago. Apapa Port, Lagos. A warehouse accident. The same compound. I sat with him for 19 days before he died, and the doctors kept showing me what to recognize in case of re-exposure. A pause. I never forgot. Flat. Factual. The words a container she had reinforced precisely so they would not crack in public. Kang Min-jae was quiet for a moment that had weight in it. I'm sorry about your brother. His name was Anderson, she said. Something moved in his face, just slightly, like the name landed somewhere specific inside him, somewhere she could not see from where she was standing but could feel from where she was standing, which was its own kind of information. Anderson? He repeated. Yes. She refilled his water and moved to the next table. When he left, there was an envelope under his plate. She opened it in the kitchen. More money than 2 weeks of shifts. Jisoo was beside her before she'd finished counting. Again? Again. Vera. Jisoo took her gently by the arm and turned her so they were facing each other. He came in last Tuesday when you were off, sat in your section, ordered nothing, just sat there for 2 hours and left. She paused. What kind of man does that? A patient one. Or a man who is trying to find a reason to come back and won't admit it to himself yet. Vera put the envelope in her bag. She went back to work. She could feel Jisoo watching her for the rest of the shift with that expression. 1 part worried, 2 parts something that looked dangerously close to hope. And she chose not to acknowledge it because she did not yet have language for what was forming inside her, and she refused to speak in vocabularies she hadn't earned. Anderson would have told her that was exactly the problem. She opened his hospital file on a Tuesday night she couldn't sleep, not looking for anything specific, just needing to feel close to him. She found the exposure report, the chain of custody documentation. She read through the warehouse operators, the registered companies, the parent entities. 3 layers deep, in small print at the bottom of a page. A logistics subsidiary registered in Seoul. She read the parent company name. She read it again. The warehouse where Anderson died. The cracked container. The 6 hours. The 19 days. The silence of every official who should have answered for it. Connected, through a chain of negligence, to a network registered under Kang Min-jae. Vera sat completely still. She thought about the way he'd repeated Anderson's name. Like it landed somewhere specific. She thought about the plain card with the phone number and the man who had sat in her section for 2 hours ordering nothing. She thought about what it meant that her first feeling upon reading this document was not anger. It was grief, for what she had almost let herself begin to want. She closed the folder. She did not call the number that night, or the next, or the night after that. And then her mother called. Vera, a man came to the house. He was polite. He just looked at everything. He left a card and said to pass the number to you. Vera's hand tightened on the phone until her knuckles ached. Did he go inside? No, he stood at the gate. Vera, what is... Lock the gate tonight, Mama. I'll call you tomorrow. I love you. She ended the call. A message arrived from an unknown number almost immediately. 4 words, 48 hours, then consequences. Vera sat on her kitchen floor, not from weakness, because sometimes the floor is the most honest place to be. She sat there for 7 minutes. She thought about Anderson's flashcards still on a wall in Lagos that nobody had taken down, about her mother's garden, about the life she had built in Seoul with her own careful hands, now being used as a pressure point in someone else's war. She broke down in a sob and cried for 20 minutes. She stood. She washed her face. She looked at the plain card on the counter. She called the number. 1 ring. Vera. They contacted my mother, she said, in Lagos. She has nothing to do with any of this. 48 hours before... Her voice held. She was proud of that. Can you help her? A short, dense pause. Her address. She gave it to him. 3 hours, he said. Then, Vera. Yes. She will be fine. You can go to work tomorrow. She went to work. She served her tables. She smiled at the right moments. Jisoo watched her from across the room with pure worry dressed as ordinary attention, and Vera gave her a small nod that meant I'm still here, and Jisoo gave one back that meant I see you, and that small wordless exchange was the thing that kept Vera's hands steady for the entire shift. 2 hours, 40 minutes later, her phone vibrated. She is safe. She will stay safe. Vera read it in the back kitchen. She put her phone face down on the counter. She pressed both palms flat against the cool metal surface and breathed slowly until the thing behind her sternum stopped feeling like an open wound. She did not let herself feel yet the full weight of what he had done. She filed it carefully in the part of herself she would open later, in private, when she could afford it. She went back to the floor. She finished her shift. She took a different route home. She had been rotating routes since the bench, varying her timing, varying her path, the small disciplines of a woman who had accepted that she was being watched and refused to be predictable. Halfway home she heard it. Footsteps, not close, not aggressive. Matching her pace with the patience of someone not concerned about losing her. Vera's body understood before her mind caught up. She walked faster. The footsteps walked faster. She turned a corner. The footsteps turned. She saw the convenience store light ahead. She pushed through the door, positioned herself between the ramyun shelf and the refrigerator, picked up a product and stared at it without reading it. Through the window, a man at the corner across the street, waiting. And then, from the left, a second man appearing, taking a position, too. She opened her phone, the number already on screen. She had pulled it up while still moving, some part of her already knowing where this night was going. She pressed call. 1 ring. Vera. I think someone is following me. Steady. Completely steady. I'm inside a convenience store. I can see 2 of them through the window. They're waiting. Which street? She told him. Stay inside. Stay visible from the window. Don't go to the back of the store. She heard him moving. Keys. A door. An engine. Talk to me. I'm fine. I know you are, he said. Talk to me anyway. She looked at the shelf in front of her. There are too many ramyun options in this country. Anderson would have had opinions. He would have ranked every single one and sent me a spreadsheet at 2 in the morning like it was urgent. A pause. What kind of opinions? Aggressive ones. He would have put Shin Ramyun at the top non-negotiably and then spent 3 paragraphs defending it. He'd be right, Min-jae said. Don't tell me you have opinions about ramyun. I have opinions about everything. Something moved through her chest that she did not try to name. She looked at the window. One of the men outside had shifted, moving closer to the entrance. Min Jae. They're moving. 90 seconds. I need you to know something, she said, and she hadn't planned to say it. It arrived fully formed, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment, this particular combination of fear and exhaustion, and the sound of his voice. I found the warehouse document, 3 weeks ago, the subsidiary. Anderson's connection to your network. I know. 3 seconds of silence, dense and full. I know, he said quietly. I pulled the same records after you told me his name. I needed to understand what my chain had touched. A pause. I'm sorry, Vera. That is not a defense. It is just something I need you to hear. Headlights swept across the store window. A car stopped at the curb. 2 of Min Jae's people stepped out and positioned themselves between the entrance and the men waiting on the corner. A rapid, silent calculation. The waiting men left. No incident. No scene. The store door opened. Kang Min Jae walked in. And here is the moment. The one the entire story had been patiently, quietly building toward from the second she whispered 3 words behind his chair. He looked at her. Not the reading, not the cataloguing, not the disciplined professional assessment she had watched him apply to every room he had ever entered in her presence. He looked at her the way people look at something they thought they had lost before they understood it was something they needed. He crossed the store, stopped in front of her. His eyes moved over her face quickly, checking, confirming. And when he found no evidence of harm, something in his jaw released that had been held, she realized, since the moment she said 2 of them. Neither of them spoke. Then Vera looked down at his hands, resting at his sides. They were shaking. Very slightly. But she had 19 days of practice at noticing the things people's bodies did when their mouths couldn't say the words. She was very good at this. You're shaking, she said. He looked at his hands, like they had done something without his authorization. Min Jae. He looked up. Why are you shaking? He looked at her for a long moment. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The ramyun shelf stood its patient, ordinary ground. Seoul moved past the window entirely unbothered. Don't take that route home anymore, he said. It was not an answer. It was the shape of an answer with the answer removed from inside it. And that absence, that thing sitting right there behind his eyes where she could see it perfectly, told her more than words could have. He drove her home. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes. The city moved past the windows in its nighttime version. Quieter, more honest somehow, the way cities are at night when they stop performing for themselves. He was 26, Vera said, not to anything he had asked. Just to the dark of the car and the moving city and the man beside her who had said, I'm sorry in a convenience store in a way that had no strategy behind it. Anderson. He was 26 and he had plans for every year after that. He had a plan for 30 and a plan for 40, and he talked about them like they were appointments he was going to keep. Min Jae said nothing. He let her have the space of it completely. He would have kept them, she said. He was that kind of person, the kind who actually does the things they say they're going to do. That's rare, Min Jae said quietly. I know, she said. I knew it then too. I just didn't know how rare until he was gone. They drove. The Han River appeared briefly between buildings, black and glittering, and then was gone again. What was he going to do here? Min Jae asked. In Seoul. Trade, she said. He thought the Lagos-Seoul corridor was going to define the next 20 years and he wanted to be inside it from the beginning. He was learning Korean. He had a whole plan. A pause. He was right, Min Jae said, about the corridor. He was right about most things, Vera said. It was genuinely annoying. The smallest sound from Min Jae beside her, not quite a laugh. Something that preceded one. The place a laugh comes from, in a person who doesn't produce them casually. She filed it carefully. At her building, he walked her to the door. stood in the entrance hallway for a moment that had no practical justification for its length. He looked at her once more with the look she had run out of categories for. "Thank you," she said, "for my mother, for tonight." He looked at her. "Go inside," he said, quietly, like the words were covering something else he could not make himself say yet. She went inside. The door closed. She stood in the dark of her apartment with her back against it and did not move for a long time. Outside, his car sat at the curb for 23 minutes. His lieutenant called. "Situation resolved?" "Yes." "And the woman? Do we maintain the detail?" Min-jae watched the building. Third-floor window. He had noted which one when they arrived. "She is not a situation," he said. He ended the call. He sat in the dark and let the truth arrange itself into its own shape, the way he had always found it did when he stopped trying to manage it. He had walked into a convenience store because she called him from it, and he had been moving before she finished her second sentence. He had sat in this car on this street because he could not make himself drive away. His hands had shaken in front of her, and he had looked at his own hands like they belonged to someone he didn't recognize. He knew what that was. He put the car in drive. He did not look up at the third-floor window because he was not fully confident he would leave if he did. Upstairs, in the dark, Vera stood at the window at an angle that let her see the edge of his car's roof below. She watched it for 23 minutes. When it pulled away, she let out a breath she had been holding for longer than just tonight. She found him at his usual table 2 days later. She sat down across from him without asking. He looked at her without surprise, like he had been waiting for this exact version of the conversation since the document existed. She put the folder on the table between them. He looked at it, looked at her. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks, she said. "You didn't call me." I needed to think. He nodded, like that was not just acceptable but expected. "Tell me," she said, "all of it, without making yourself look better than the facts allow." He did, quietly, completely. The sublessee, the improper storage, the terminated contract, the incident he knew only as a number on a report. Never as Anderson, never as a 26-year-old man with Korean flashcards on his wall and a sister who learned the language he was learning and moved to the city he never reached. "It moved through my chain," he said. "That is mine to carry regardless of intent." He did not say it wasn't my fault. She had been listening for that specifically, and it did not come. "Anderson's mother was owed an accounting," Vera said. "Nobody gave her one." "It has been addressed," he said. "When?" 3 weeks ago. When you told me his name." Vera looked at the table. She thought about Anderson's mother receiving something after 3 years of official silence and what that would mean to her, whether it was enough, whether enough was even the right measure. "It doesn't bring him back," she said. "No," he said. "It doesn't." Silence. The restaurant sounds continued around them. The city moved past the window. "He was going to be good at Seoul," she said quietly. "Not to Min-jae exactly, just to the air. Anderson, he was going to walk in here and understand it within a week. That was how he was. He arrived places and just understood them. Cities, people, situations. He read everything fast." "Like his sister," Min-jae said. She looked at him. "The way you read that dinner," he said. "What was happening, where the danger was, what to do about it. That's not training. That's how someone is built." She was quiet for a moment. He would have hated that you said that. He thought he was the perceptive one. "Were you competitive?" "Constantly," she said. "About everything. It was exhausting and I miss it every single day." Something shifted in the conversation. Imperceptibly, the way the best shifts happen. Anderson had moved from being a wound between them to being a person. A real specific person who was competitive with his sister and had plans for every decade of his life, and would have walked into Seoul and understood it within a week. For the first time in the entire story, he existed in a room as himself rather than as a grief or a document or a reason. Vera felt it happen. She thought it might be the most important thing that had happened between her and Min Jae. This small act of letting Anderson be alive in a conversation, even briefly, even now. "Are you angry?" Min Jae asked. "Yes," she said. "I'm also sitting here." He looked at her, past all of it, past every layer. And she saw what was underneath. Not softness. Something more complicated and more durable. Something that had been accumulating across every encounter they'd had and had quietly run out of room to stay hidden. "Why?" he asked. "Because I'm tired of stories with only one version," she said. "And because Anderson would have told me to have the conversation before I made the decision." She stood. She went back to the counter. Behind her she heard him exhale, barely audible, entirely private. The sound of a man who has been holding something for a long time and has been given, not forgiveness, but the possibility of continuing, which was perhaps the thing he needed more. Jisoo cornered her in the back kitchen 40 minutes later. "He watched you the entire time. He didn't even pretend to look at anything else." "Jisoo, I'm reporting what I observed." She leaned against the counter. "He came himself to get me that night. He sat outside your building for almost half an hour. He shook in a convenience store. He settled a 3-year debt without being asked and without telling you about it." She paused. "What kind of man does all of that?" "A complicated one," Vera said. "Complicated. Not wrong. The difference matters enormously." Jisoo picked up her tray. "You and Anderson were the most alike people. You know what he would say right now." She left. Vera stood at the counter and thought about Anderson's flashcards. The point is, showing up to the thing before you're ready. She thought about a car that didn't move for 23 minutes. She thought about hands shaking without permission. She went back to the floor. Subscribe if you want to see where these two people end up. Because the next 3 minutes are the reason this story exists. He came in on a Sunday. She was ready for him, not defensively, in the way you are ready for something you have stopped pretending you don't want. She seated him herself. Brought his order without asking. He noticed that she saw it register. And something in him settled slightly, like a question he had been carrying had just been answered without being asked. When the afternoon service thinned, she sat across from him. Nothing on the table between them. "I have Thursday off," she said. He looked at her. "There's a place in Mangwon," he said carefully. "Nothing to do with any of this. Just food." "What kind of food?" "Whatever you want." "That's not how restaurants work." "It is when I make the reservation," she almost smiled. "Thursday, 6 o'clock." He nodded. He looked out the window at Seoul, and she saw on his face that slightly stunned quality of someone who wanted something and is surprised to find it being offered. The private bewilderment of a man unaccustomed to wanting things he cannot strategize his way toward. "Min Jae," she said. He looked at her. "Anderson would have liked you," she said. "He would have pretended not to at first. He liked to take his time with people." "Smart man," Min Jae said quietly. "We were related," she said. The smallest thing moved across his face. Not quite a smile, the place a smile comes from. She filed it in the part of herself where she kept things she wanted to remember exactly. Thursday. Mangwon. String lights and a window and no association with anything dangerous or unresolved. Just food and 2 people across a table who had earned this meal through a series of events neither of them would have chosen, and both of them quietly could not imagine not having lived through. They talked for 4 hours. About Lagos. About Busan, where he grew up, the port smell he had been trying to escape and kept gravitating back toward. About Seoul and what it takes from you before it gives anything back. She showed him Anderson's photograph on her phone, laughing at something off-camera, mid-sentence, entirely himself. Min Jae looked at it for a long time. "He looks like you. Same eyes." "He was funnier," she said, "by a significant distance. You're funny. I'm dry. It's different." "I like dry," he said. Simply. "A fact, Not a performance designed to please her. She noticed the difference. "What are we doing?" she said. Honest, without anxiety. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what to call it. I know what it is. I just don't have a clean name for it given everything between us." "Given everything," she agreed. "But I'd like to keep doing it," he said. "I'd like to keep sitting across from you. Tables included." "Tables included," she laughed. "Full and unguarded and warm. The kind that arrives without warning and takes up more room than expected." He looked at her laughing and made no effort to hide what was on his face, and she noticed this, and did not look away from it, and that small act of mutual visibility, of neither of them retreating from what the other could plainly see, was the most intimate thing that had happened between them across the entire story. Walking out into the Mangwon night, the air was sharp and clean and entirely without mercy. Their hands were close at their sides, perhaps 3 centimeters of space between them that the whole evening had been quietly, patiently negotiating without either of them acknowledging it. A motorbike came fast around the corner. Nothing dangerous, just sudden and close to the pavement. Min Jae's hand moved, not dramatically, just his hand coming up to the outside of her arm for one moment, guiding her slightly inward, away from the road, the most instinctive and unthinking gesture. Then the motorbike was gone. His hand dropped. They kept walking. Neither of them said anything, but Vera's hand, which had been at her side, moved slightly toward where his had been. Not reaching, not closing the distance, just moved, noting the absence, the way you turn toward warmth without deciding to. 3 centimeters of space. Neither of them closed it. Both of them felt it like a door standing open. At her door. "Good night, Vera." "Good night, Min Jae." He waited until she was inside. She heard his footsteps on the step for a moment after the door closed. Then receding into the Seoul night. Unhurried, deliberate. The footsteps of a man who has made a decision he is not yet ready to speak out loud. She leaned against the door in the dark. She was smiling. She felt it happen and she let it happen completely, and she did not examine it or put it away for later. She just let it be there. In her kitchen, the plain card on the counter where she could see it every morning. On the table, Anderson's folder. She picked it up, held it for a moment. Then she opened her wardrobe and she did something she had not done once in 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days in Seoul. She did not put it at the back behind the winter coats where it had lived since she arrived. She put it on the shelf, visible, accessible, not buried. Not because the grief was over. It would never be entirely over, but because Anderson belonged on the shelf where she could see him, in the light of this city he talked about, in the life she had built in his name that was slowly, stubbornly, beautifully beginning to also be built in her own. She looked at his photograph on her phone. "Okay," she said. To him, to the city outside her window, to the version of herself that had stood in a hospital corridor in Lagos 3 years ago and decided, without knowing what for, to keep going. Okay. And that is where we leave them. Not at an ending, at a beginning. Which is, if you have been paying attention since the very first frame, exactly where Anderson always said the good things start, before you are ready, before you have the right language, before the story makes complete sense. Vera is still in Seoul. The playing card is on her counter where she sees it every morning. Song Dae-hyun's network has been quietly, methodically dismantled in ways that will never make a headline. Anderson's mother received what she was owed after 3 years of silence and lit a candle in a church in Lagos and did not fully know who to thank. And somewhere in this city, a man who has spent his entire life being the most controlled person in every room is learning, with considerable difficulty and absolutely no regret, what it feels like to let something matter more than control. That is the whole story. That is all of it. And if it found something in you, if Vera's quiet courage, or that convenience store, or that walk in Mangwon landed somewhere real, drop a comment and tell me what moment got you. Tell me what you would have done in that kitchen. Tell me whether 3 words whispered behind a stranger's chair was the bravest or the most reckless thing Vera ever did. If you are new here, subscribe. Share this with someone who needs a story that earns every feeling it asks for slowly, without shortcuts. Every story on this channel is built exactly this way, because the most human moments are almost never the loudest ones. See you in the next story.